All right. 3, 2, 1. Why, hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Evidence-Based Excellence Podcast, yet again, with your host and friendly neighborhood far-right thug, Mr. George Cresswell. We're not talking, at least at the moment anyway, about politics today, thank God. About Welsh and worldly Western politics and whatnot. There's been a lot of things that have developed in that field, obviously, in the very recent, past with regards to the recent, frankly, travesty. There's no words to describe how evil really it is with regards to what has been confirmed regarding the Bibas family in Israel, where I believe it was a 4-year-old and a 9-month-old have been now confirmed to have been slaughtered as far back as November 2023, and Hamas in that region were repeatedly lying about it. And not only that, they sent them back in coffins which were laced with Hamas Islamic propaganda. They were sent back in coffins, locked, without keys. And the court that was meant to be Cherie, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Cherie Bibas, the mother of the 2 children, was meant to be sent back with them. And it's now been confirmed that the other set of remains that were delivered to Israel are not Cherie Bibas. So we're now wondering where exactly the hell her or her body is, at the very least. I'll keep my thoughts out of it for this episode because it's not what we're talking about, but fair to say there's no words to describe exactly how evil this is. And there's been a lot of mask off moments with regards to people who've been supporting the quote-unquote Palestine cause. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to leave it there for today. Otherwise, I'm going to get far too emotionally charged and getting far off topic for what we're going to talk about today, which is an interesting topic in my opinion with regards to training and in the gym, improving performance with ergogenic aids and such. It's the music people listen to, and the effect that music can have on our training and on our performance. And I had to think about it, and I thought that's what I wanted to do a podcast on. I haven't read any of the literature into it. Obviously, I can give my anecdotal opinion all I want, and I can say what music I like to listen to and whether I feel better personally training with music or no music or certain types of music, okay? And obviously, everybody's going to have a different opinion on that. Some people prefer to train with no music, or they simply don't care. They have no affinity for music when they train in, whatever it may be. Some people, they literally say they can't train without music, But what does the actual data say is what I wanted to get out of the quandary, so to speak. And that's where this episode is now coming from. So I'm hoping all turns out well. I'm still practicing recording with OBS for the front-on perspective, and obviously you guys will not be looking at me from over there. You're coming through my lovely camera. But we're going to go through a lot of research today, so stay tuned. It's going to be quite a research-heavy episode, but there's going to be a lot of good things which you can take away. And not only that, now if you ever get into conversations about this in the gym and stuff, you'll actually have rigorous scientific evidence to fall back on and support your points, so to speak. It's not going to be anything really that controversial that people are going to argue you with, but you can improve people's overall education on the topic of exactly how music does or doesn't positively or negatively impacts training, whatever it may be. That's what we're going to get into today. Got a lot of notes. to go through. I'm just going to turn the brightness down on my computer a little bit. It's a little bit high. There we are. It's a little bit better. Hopefully there's not so much glare now. But basically, I wanted to ask the question, it's from a general point of view, but also from a resistance training specific point of view. But first off, as I always do, when I want to get to the most recent or have the information collated for me in a nice fashion, when I want to ask a question, I ask Consensus. Okay, Consensus is the service that I use in order to collate and bring relevant scientific information for a question that I may have forward, and then I read and I go into detail from there with the sources that they provide. But I asked the question using the prompt, does listening to music help improve resistance training performance? That was the exact prompt I used, and I'm going to bring the consensus meter up on screen now. I took a screenshot of it from at the time where I asked this question. And if you're listening to this, I realize now a common criticism that people have from when I'm recording these podcasts, and obviously I record them in video format because there's things I like to add in there, graphs and figures and actual data points that I like to put up on the screen so you can really see them, not just hear me talk about them. But obviously some people listen to this when they're driving, or some people listen to this as a accompaniment for their studies or whatever it may be. So I understand that oftentimes when I say, as you can see here, or look at this graph, it shows this, not always the best when you're trying to drive and you're not exactly sure what's going on just from listening to it. So that's something I'm going to be implementing a little bit more going forward. I'm going to try and flesh out wordy descriptions a little bit more so that you can, have a more accurate or better mental picture of what's going on, what I'm trying to talk about, and not just hearing me say, as you can see here, me thinking that everybody's going to be in a position to watch the video. Obviously, that's not always the case. It's the ideal format, but it's not always the case. So anyway, the consensus meter, and it collated the results from 11 papers, okay, at this time. And overall, there was a yes, so studies showing that yes, the music does help improve resistance training performance, was in the 64% of the studies that were listed. There was mixed results in 18 of them, 18%, and there was no observable effect or no observable improvement in 18% of them. So I did not go through every single one of these. What I did was I went through some of the ones in particular. So I want to do we'll do another episode on this potentially. But just to preface going forward, a lot of what I'm going to say is not necessarily definitive. There is strong evidence for it, as you can see by the 64%. But there's still questions surrounding a lot of what we're going to be talking about today, okay? There's still debate going on as to, exact mechanisms and certain effects, all of these things. So take it with a grain of salt, but also understand there is an evidence base for this, okay? But there are still questions that need to be asked. There are still questions that need to be answered. There's further studies that need to be done, as is always in the realm of science, okay? But I'm going to read you the Copilot summary also. So Copilot, as you may have known, is a service that's often accompanied with these AI databases and is increasingly coming into more other things like I know Microsoft and Microsoft Word and stuff like that is bringing in Copilot AI to help people draft things and all stuff like that. Basically another kind of AI, writing software, text-based software. And basically what Copilot did in this scenario underneath the consensus meter is it will give a written description of what these studies, a written summary, basically, like an abstract of all of these different studies and what they're showing. So I'm going to read that to you as well before we go into specifics with some of the studies, because in this episode, I looked at one study in particular. A lot of the study, there's about 30 references for this episode, by the way, which I'm not sure I'm going to be able to put into the description of all of these things. I might have to try and find a way to put it in like a Word document or something like that. Or put them up on an article on my website and you can go and read them. But there's about 28 references, and there's a lot more that I could have included. But ultimately, when you're doing projects like this, when you're doing a lot of research for things, you've got to draw the line somewhere. Okay, I think we've got a lot to talk about today. That's more than enough to talk about. It's going to be a long episode, so stay tuned. But yeah, we've got more than enough to talk about. But I'm going to read you the Copilot summary also, so that obviously we've been recording this now for what? Not even 10 minutes. Some of you would have already zoned out. Some of you can't even have the attention span to watch a 30-second video on YouTube, for God's sake. So I'm going to read you this Copilot summary. And if you take nothing away from this, other than the consensus meter of there's a bit of conflicting result, but majority says yes, and the Copilot summary, which I'm going to go through now, at least you're better off than you was 8-10 minutes ago. So the Copilot summary. Listening to music can enhance resistance training performance, particularly when the music is preferred by the individual. This effect is primarily due to increased motivation and improved psychological responses during exercise. Key findings: preferred music and performance. That's a big area we're going to be going into later, by the way. Listening to preferred music significantly increases the number of repetitions completed, power, and velocity during resistance exercises like the bench press. It also boosts motivation compared to non-preferred music. Music tempo and strength performance. Fast tempo music can improve knee extension torque, although it may not affect knee flexion. The tempo of music does not significantly influence psychological outcomes during strength testing. Music during warm-up and rest. Listening to music during warm-up or rest periods can enhance performance in subsequent resistance exercises. Preferred music during warm-up increases repetitions to failure and motivation, although it may not affect barbell velocity or perceived exertion. So you're going to see that there's some studies that show yes, some studies that show no. There's never a perfect, relationship for the most part with things like these, okay? Psychological and physiological responses. Music can modulate physiological responses such as heart rate and muscle activation and improve psychological factors like mood and motivation, which collectively enhance exercise performance. And finally, music timing. Playing music throughout the entire exercise session can delay fatigue perception and improve performance in isometric strength tasks. Music during fatigue alone has a modest effect. So conclusion. Overall, listening to music, especially preferred or fast-tempo music, can improve resistance training performance by enhancing motivation, delaying fatigue, and increasing power output. These benefits are most pronounced when music is integrated into warm-ups, rest periods, or throughout the exercise session. I'm going to take a quick drink, a moment. Okay, so if you take nothing away from this episode, bar that, obviously you're far better off in terms of knowing what to say. If somebody ever asks you the question, does music actually improve training performance? Then, there's a lot of good factors you can take away from there. Music has a tendency to improve resistance training performance by enhancing motivation, delaying fatigue, and increasing power output. There's already, that's already big three reasons, as you could say, that music is a good thing to add to your training in terms of ergogenic aids that aren't directly supplements and stuff like that. But let's talk about what sort of happens. Let's go into a little bit more detail now about what happens when we listen to music, okay? So we're going to look at some of the physiological and psychological responses, okay? Now, you might also see this referred to in the literature as psychophysiological, where the interaction between psychological and physiological variables is grouped together to what's called psychophysiological, because the two are dependent, that you have dependent effects on each other. But believe it or not, music can actually increase and reduce heart rate, and that's largely down to the music type, the tempo, the state of training as well. So, for example, heart rate has a tendency to increase with fast music during exercise, and if you play relaxing music, especially in the post-exercise setting, you actually reduce it a lot quicker. Due to music also potentially promoting increased relaxation during training, you actually have reduced and increased systolic blood pressure depending on the phase of training, depending on where you are in terms of your training session or whether you're before and after. And obviously that goes concomitantly with increases in heart rate and increases in stroke volume, increases in cardiac output, okay? So you have a quote here, which I've taken from, I believe it's a paper by Edworthy and Waring, which again, you'll find in the description down below, or you will find it in a reference on you'll find it in the article that will be associated with this on my website, okay? So there's a quote here. It might not be from this study because I forgot to label where this quote came from in my notes. So apologies if it's actually the wrong study I've just talked about here, but it's from one of them. I know it's from one of them. Presumably from this Edworthy and Waring study from 2006. Significant effects and interactions were found for running speed and heart rate across the different music tempo and loudness levels. More positive affect, we'll get onto what that means in a moment, was observed during the music condition in comparison to the no music condition. No significant differences for perceived exertion were found across conditions. The results confirm that fast, loud music might be played to enhance optimal exercising and show how loudness and tempo interact, okay? So depending on volume, depending on BPM, depending on all of these different factors, type of music, whether it's a dirty stinking bass, or whether it's more of like a synthy doom style soundtrack, or whether it's more like some kind of sonata or something like that. Okay, so some nice Beethoven or whatever it may be that's nice and relaxing will influence the physiological and the psychological responses. Reduced RPE is a pretty big one that is observed consistently in the data. We just had the potential conflict, obviously, so I'm assuming that, yes, the quote, I believe, is from that Edworthy and Waring paper, because I have another part of that quote here, which says no significant differences for perceived exertion were found across conditions. So there is potential conflict, especially with regarding the effect and effective music type and stuff like that. But there is one study here, which is from Arazi, Azadi, and Purabed, I hope I'm pronouncing all those right, from 2015, where they saw greatest reductions in RPE when music is used in the warm-up, as well as now they used a circuit-type resistance training session, okay? So you've got to take into account session type as well. When music was used in the warm-up as well as in the resistance training session versus no music. There were significant differences in all of them, I believe, except in the condition where there was music in one of the two conditions, unless I've just got my more than and less sign the wrong way around there. But you have the two greatest things that they sort of attributed this to was enhanced arousal. I'll get into what that means in a moment. It's not arousal in the typical sense of you thinking about that word. And greater motor coordination due to elevated sympathetic nervous system activity. Again, going back to that modulation of physiological responses. Okay, one of the biggest things that music can do, especially if it's music that's stimulating, not sedative, will actually upregulate sympathetic nervous system activity. So sympathetic nervous system activity, for those who don't know, is the nervous system activity you'll commonly see associated with fight or flight. Okay, it's the upregulation of autonomic nervous system processes that prepare you for some kind of action that you need increased locomotive capability for. Okay, so that's why you get increased blood flow to the extremities, you get increased heart rate, increased breathing rate, because your body's preparing you typically to fight or flight. Okay, that's what we're talking about here. Sympathetic, increase, parasympathetic, decrease. So, just going to make sure my webcam hasn't gone out of focus a minute, because when I do excessive hand gestures, it has a tendency to go out of focus. Nope, I think we're still all good. We're still all good. So, lower exercise lactate levels, get onto that in a moment, likely due to that increased heart rate and also increased metabolic clearing out of the muscles in particular. And again, here I said greater relative relaxation sensations during exercise. So, here's a quote for you from a study by Smedra and Bacharach. I hope I have pronounced that correctly. From 1998, it's going back a fairly long time, but higher values for hemodynamics and lactate in the no music trial is suggestive of greater metabolic demand. However, oxygen consumption was not different. Perhaps the music allowed individuals to relax, reducing muscle tension, thereby increasing blood flow and lactate clearance, while decreasing lactate production in the working muscle. Now, don't jump out at me and say that it's going to reduce tension, thereby that's going to be bad for resistance training. I know it might sound like that just from that quote. Hear me out, there's a lot more things that are going to show you that this is, in many ways, actually potentially a positive. Okay, it's going to have net improvements on training volume and things like that. So, although you might hear the term reducing muscle tension and think, oh my God, no, that's going to be horrendous. Put that thought to the back of your mind for a moment. It's not in the way that you think. The combined results of this study suggest that the introduction of music has a psychobiological impact on the exerciser, demonstrated by changes in perceived effort, lactate, and norepinephrine. Okay, now norepinephrine is the opposite of epinephrine, and epinephrine typically has the other name, adrenaline. Okay, so as demonstrated by changes in perceived effort, lactate accretion, and also the opposite of adrenaline. So again, upregulating that sympathetic nervous system activity, what we're saying basically. Reduction in state anxiety, which is always good. So state anxiety is the temporary intense feeling of anxiety in relation to a stressful situation. Okay, it's distinct from trait anxiety, which is what you typically hear people say when they say things like, I have anxiety. These kinds of things. Okay, it's not referencing trait anxiety, as what we will call it. It's referencing state anxiety, which is the anxiety you get temporarily in response to a stressful situation. Okay, again, music promoting relaxation. And that happens consistently across trials as that's observed. So, modulation of autonomic nervous system in favor of excitation over soothing. Okay, again, that largely depends on the type of music that you listen to. But it's from Davis and Thought, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, from 1989. And there's a quote here, physiological data showed that the music aroused and excited rather than soothed autonomic and muscular activity. So that's going to be one of the main things that's going to contribute to music's ergogenicity. Okay, when we're talking about ergogenicity, we're talking about work generating. Okay, that's why you get the term, by the way, if you're using a ski erg. Erg is short for ergometer. Now, meter means to measure, and then erg means to work, measure work, or ergo means to work. Okay, so you have ergogenic, genic meaning generating or creating, and then, or in this way, improving. Okay, and then ergo meaning work, work improving. So that's where we get the term ergogenic from. So I'm talking about music as an ergogenic aid, or creatine, or caffeine, or ashwagandha, whatever it may be. As ergogenic aids, that's what we're referring to. And then you have something called the Mozart effect, was what was observed in this modulation of autonomic nervous system activity. So the Mozart effect was something that was coined, I believe, by Thompson, Schellenberg, and Hussein from this study in 2001. And it's basically that they observed improvements in a test of spatial abilities that were greatest after listening to a Mozart sonata, okay, which is pleasant and energetic, versus silence, or what's known as Albinoni adagio, meaning slow and sad music, basically, okay? And that's where they coined this Mozart effect from. They seen that this Mozart music, or this happy and energetic music, this pleasant and energetic music, was conferring these benefits, okay? There was also different responses in enjoyment, mood, and arousal associated with different music selection that they observed. However, it's not necessarily due to the fact that it was Mozart music or anything like that. They later then observed that it was likely due to the effects that it had on the sympathetic nervous system and modulating arousal and mood of the participants, which either positively or negatively affected motivation to exercise or do certain tasks, okay? So then they quoted here, moreover, when such differences were held constant by statistical means, the Mozart effect disappeared. These findings provide compelling evidence that the Mozart effect is an artifact of arousal and mood, okay? So again, it's having the mood improvements and the arousal elevations up to a certain point, because the thing you note about arousal, which is basically your excitation level to do a certain thing, it operates in a inverted U-shaped curve. There's an optimal level of it. It's a little bit like how most people would describe drunkenness, okay, and getting drunk on a night out or whatever. You start off, you gradually, as you get more and more drunk, you gradually go up, okay? You gradually go up until you hit the peak. Typically when you're tipsy or you're merry, okay? That's often terms people use. But if you start drinking too much more than that, you start coming down, and you start coming down quite rapidly, okay? And we've all been there, okay? For the most part, at least in the society that we live in, we've all been there. So arousal works in a very similar way, okay? It goes up and up and up, as things that improve arousal. Might be things like positive imagery, using music or stuff like that, getting warmed up and increasing your actual, body temperature and muscle temperature and blood flow and heart rate, all of these things, doing all these things to increase arousal. It gets to a certain point, but it's like trying to stimulate somebody who's already optimally stimulated. Eventually you're going to make them overstimulated, and then performance decrement's going to occur. So this Mozart effect that they observed was simply due to the arousal and the mood improvements that were potentially as a result of the music. So you can say, again, they're dependent on each other, okay? If you listen to slow and sad music, you're probably going to not want to do very physically active, demanding, and energetic things, okay? Then we have reduced subjective fatigue. So this is from a study by Liu, Li, and Du from 2021. Listening to the music of choice and fast-paced music during the exercise all delays the physical and mental fatigue, improves the aerobic exercise ability, and has its own characteristics which is worth promoting. Slow-paced music has no such effect and is not recommended for use in sports, okay? Now, whether the music pace supersedes music preference, we'll get into that in a moment, because a lot of people prefer certain music genres that use typically slow music, but that actually will confer the same benefit due to them being preferred. Okay, we've got a good example of something like that's going to happen later. So stay tuned. Again, it's going to be a long episode, but there's going to be a lot of good things that we talk about. However, one thing to take into account, obviously relating to time of training and other factors such as recovery, relaxing music may promote greater fatigue recovery post-exercise. And this is from a study by Jing and Zudong from 2008. Teeth in. The results showed, quote, that heart rates, urinary protein, and RPE decreased significantly after the application of relaxing music. these decreases were greater than those without music. So there you go. So again, you listen to relaxing music in the post-gym setting, you're going to start getting into a parasympathetic state and dissipating that fatigue a lot quicker, especially if you have more than one training session in a day, which most athletes will, or if you're somebody that sometimes trains twice a day because you miss out on a training session on one day, okay? It's going to be good. Take this into account. Start dissipating the fatigue as quick as you can by maybe listening to some relaxing music post-exercise. Then you have things like lower overall tension, decreased depression, anger as well. Anger can be a positive in some instances, okay? Right, typically when you're in a state where, you might be bringing up some old childhood trauma in the middle of your training to sort of eke out those extra 5 reps and stuff like that, anger, and those negative emotions can be good. I like what Patrick Bet-David, there's a quote from Patrick Bet-David in one of his books. I believe it's either Your Next 5 Moves or Choose Your Enemies Wisely. He said, make pain your fuel. Make pain your fuel. Improvements in positive feeling, improvements in mood. Obviously, all of these can be attributed to exercise in general as well. Decreased subjective fatigue, like we just talked about. And then we've got something called positive valence or positive valence. Now, we're going to talk about the term here, effective valence, okay? And all effective valence means is positivity or negativity or goodness or badness that an individual perceives intrinsically about a particular factor or thing. Now, there's going to be an effective valence associated with every single factor in your life, okay? It doesn't have to necessarily be related to training. You're going to have different effective valence associated with different training protocols, okay? Some people say they love going to group exercise classes, but they hate going to the gym itself. And some people say they hate going on a treadmill, but they might like the rower, okay? Positivity and negativity associated intrinsically with these things, okay? So you have valence associated with everything inside and outside of the gym, okay? Reading, social media, all of these different things. Positive valence, however, increases acutely with both endurance and resistance-based exercise, possibly to a greater degree with high-intensity activities. So positive valence has been shown to acutely increase with both endurance and resistance-based exercise, but maybe to a greater degree or with higher intensity activity. With music and exercise combined, Hutchinson et al. We'll go over who they are in a moment. I've forgotten where I've actually drawn this particular quote from. I apologize for that. I should have made a note of it, but I've forgotten. It'll be in the references down below. Showed that individuals were able to maintain exercise at a greater intensity while still maintaining a good quote-unquote feeling when listening to self-selected music versus when they listened to no music, okay? So music, especially self-selected and also an AKA preferred music, because obviously somebody's selecting it themselves, they're not going to select something which they don't like to listen to. It will it'll maintain this good feeling even at higher exercise intensities, which is obviously going to be good for improving training outcomes. Also, you're going to be increasing more volume, getting closer to failure, those kinds of things. So what we're saying is here, music plus exercise equals exercise maintained at a greater intensity, which is typically what we're always looking for, aside from when we're going through deload periods and stuff like that, while maintaining a good feeling when listening to selected music versus no music, okay? Motivational music resulted in greater workloads completed during cycling with concomitant improvements in positive effective valence. So motivational music, some people, they listen to motivational speeches and movie scenes when I'm in the gym. I remember there was one session where I was on the leg press and then I just finished listening to David Goggins' book, Can't Hurt Me. And obviously he makes a big point talking about a scene in Rocky 1 where they went on to round 14, where I believe it is the round where Rocky gets knocked down and Mick's screaming at him, stay down, stay down. And he refuses to get up. And Goggins talks about it as the look on Sylvester Stallone's face. The look on Carl Weathers' face, the look on Apollo Creed's face is just the look of somebody who's had their soul taken from them. Like, what do I need to do to kill this guy, basically? I can't kill this guy. What do I do? I was listening to that scene in the gym, and obviously you've got the score in the background. I've forgotten the name of the score. Oh no, I've forgotten the name of the score. How can I forget the name of such an iconic score? I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to need to take a detour to find what the name. Obviously, you guys probably already know what the score is, but I need to find out what the bloody score was. So I'm going to quickly fire up my Spotify and find out what the score was. I can't believe I've forgotten it. I'm on such a mind blank today because I didn't sleep the best. Is it? It's not going to fly now, is it? No, it's not going to fly now. Oh, I don't know. It must be that one. Huh. I don't know, but either way, the Rocky soundtrack that is played at that point in the film, I can't remember what it is. I cannot believe that I can't remember what it is. Is it in here? Oh, Go in the Distance. There we are. I knew I'd find it. Go in the Distance. That's obviously the big part of the scene. They're talking about Rocky going the distance. Nobody's ever gone the distance with Apollo Creed in the film. So that's the big point of Rocky. He's not necessarily going in to win it. I mean, this is like a theme of, motivation in and of itself. A lot of people don't do things because they think they're not going to be the absolute best at it. When a lot of times, if you can just go the distance, you see the marked improvements from where you would have been if you'd never started because you never thought you were going to be the best, or you didn't start because you thought you were never going to be the best. So yeah, going the distance, that iconic score's in the background, and then the headphones full blast, and screaming in the gym because it's luckily nobody was in there, and I think it was at a time where the gym might have it was at the gym I worked at the time, and the gym might have closed, and whilst people were cleaning up downstairs, I think I had a bit of time to train. So yeah, that was all fun. But yeah, why not? Why not? I like another scene, a scene I find really motivational as well, because it really highlights, the value of a coach. Is the speech from Any Given Sunday. If you haven't watched that speech from Al Pacino, you should go and watch that. And what's the other one? This is where the guy's doing the suicide crawl on his back. I've forgotten what it is, but the coach gets him to blindfold himself because the coach knows he's holding himself back. It's like saying like an American, university or high school. And the coach blindfolds him, and he makes him carry another one of his teammates, one of his lighter teammates, in a bear crawl from. He says to go to like a certain point, but obviously he blindfolds him, so he's not going to know when he gets to that point. And he blindfolds him. And this way, sometimes we need that as well. That sensory deprivation is the key part of the literature is to do with sensory deprivation and dissociation, which we'll get into a little bit later in this episode as well. But because he can't see where he is, obviously he has no reference point to put the limiting factor on. And it really forces this kid to go really as hard as he can. And as he's getting further and further down the field, you start seeing his teammates, they're gearing up, they're watching, they can't believe it. And there's this intense score in the background. The coach is in his face, screaming at him. I can't remember. I can't remember the name of the film. It's so annoying me. Is it? I'm trying to find it. Is it Facing? I think that's it. I think it's from Facing the Giants. Yeah, I think it's from Facing the Giants. There we go. I think I found the film. But it's a scene I love to watch before I go to the gym. Yeah, this is it. From Facing the Giants. That's the name of the film. It came out in 2006. And, the kid is screaming because he's in so much pain. But the coach is not letting him quit. He's saying, you don't quit, basically, until you fall flat on your fucking face. And the kid eventually, that's literally what happens. He completely gives out. He's on the verge of tears, screaming into the floor, screaming into the grass, right? And he's like saying, I don't have any more. Just make it stop. I don't have any more. I can't go any further. And the coach just gets down to him. And I remember this exact way. It gives me goosebumps every single time. And he gets down next to the kid who's lying on the grass. He says, look up, Brock. You're in the end zone. And the kid thought he was only going to go to halfway. But when you turn the blinders on, with this kid on his back, mind you, he has another kid on his back for this entire crawl, he goes to the end zone. And I get goosebumps just thinking about it. It's such an awesome scene. And, really puts the thing on the coach. Because oftentimes as coaches, we can, we want to just be really nice and, not want to scream and shout at people. That's not the way I like to do things. Okay? But sometimes, that's what people need. Sometimes people either need a little bit of tough love, or they need somebody being like, no, fuck you, you're not quitting. I'm not letting you quit, and matching their intensity. Because obviously the kid was, getting more and more agitated, and the coach had to match that. So it's just an amazing scene. Go and watch it. But anyway, that's a massive tangent. But, movies have a massive motivational capacity as well. Anyway, going back to positive valence. Improvements in effective valence observed in trained and untrained individuals and exercise-resistant populations. So these things can be transient across exercise populations as well, whether they're positive responders or the negative responders. And then another one here. So increased feelings of vigor and vitality during short-term intense exercise performance. So sprint and power activities and strength activities. So this is from a paper by Chotaro, Himida, and Suisi. I hope I'm saying that right. From 2017, they had 24 participants. They had a 10-minute warm-up with and without music. They recorded RPE scores and measures of vigor and vitality. I can't remember exactly how they did it, but they were significantly improved in the warm-up with music condition versus no music. Fatigue significantly reduced in the music versus no music condition. So get these increased feelings of power as well, which is really, really good for improving those training outcomes. We'll get into that now when we're talking about music preference and stuff like that. So again, what have I said here? Causes vigor to pair with physiological changes, forming the new psychophysiological phenomena of power and arousal. Self-selected music may be inherent to the characteristics of the music itself. So the positive increases in performance due to these increased feelings of vigor and power and arousal will form, or rather pairing this with vigor, will form this new category of variable. And this time what you see interact, the psychological and the physiological always have effects on each other. Okay, so you have this new broad category of phenomena known as psychophysiological phenomena. And as I mentioned before, optimal arousal follows that inverted U shape. So again, it's a sweet spot in the middle. Too little or too much is not good. And again, typically, you're going to get those from high tempo, high volume, bass as well. Things that are bassy seem to have more positive effects on these kinds of things, or whether it's an 8-string synthifying the jaunty riff, evil synth and killing demons. Okay, I basically just described the Doom soundtrack there. I love the Doom soundtrack. I love BFG Division. Okay, BFG Division is an amazing gym song. If it's not in your playlist, you really should have it in your playlist. Okay. Anyway, so we're getting on to a new study now. All of this is based on one study in particular. Now it's a big review, and the studies within it that I wanted to look at in more detail to find out exactly what some of those studies found out, okay? So this is a key thing. That's why podcasts like this can take so long and be so research heavy, even if you're only looking at one topic. So a topic, think about it this way, right? Just when you're doing research for these kinds of things. And that's why often it takes so long and it's so mind-numbing from time to time. It has to be done. I'm not complaining about it. I love it. I wouldn't swap it for the world. But anyway, point being is that you have one review, and that review could have 200 references in it, or 175, whatever it may be. A lot of references in it, okay? Because a review is talking about many different topics. And think about it. Each of those references has their own reference list attached to it. And each of the references on that reference list has its own reference list attached to it. So in order for you to investigate, claims of even one of these reviews, it takes such a long time. And that's why when you're looking at, like, for example, the review might say there was a positive effect, or it has been observed that a positive effect was noted in X on Y in this sample. And then it lists the number in brackets referring to the number in the references. And you got to read that entire study. That could be an entire review in and of itself that you then got to read. Or it's a randomized control trial that you got to read. And you got to do that, again, potentially for tens, if not hundreds of things if you want to do a full review. Okay, that's why it's never feasible. It's never feasible to do that much. But even then, we're talking about one review here. But as I said, the reference list is about 30 references long. And the majority of the references that made up the list here is coming from references that were listed in this review. So that's why it often takes so long if you're going to go in depth on these things. But yeah, everything here now is based, or can be summarized in a review by Ballman. And it is titled, I'm going to read it from my references just so you can have it if you want to go and read it. Here we go. So it's called The Influence of Music Preference on Exercise and Performance, a Review. It's from the Journal of Functional Morphology and Kinesiology. It was published in 2021. So, what are we seeing when we're looking at exercise, music preference and exercise? So it's going to be a big section now. And it's going to take us close towards the end. So let's start off with the psychological. Okay, let's go a little bit in more depth, in more detail on the psychological. So psychological, what does it mean, first off, as we talked about before? It means of, affecting, or arising in the mind, related to the mental and emotional state of a person. Okay, so it's not like a chemical cause or anything like that necessarily. It's something that arises within the mind, within the mind's eye, okay? So what do we have here? We have, quote, independent of exercise, music has been suggested to influence multiple psychological domains. Indeed, previous evidence has reported improvements in positive feelings, mood, and subjective fatigue whilst listening to music. Thus, the reliance of favorable exercise performance on various psychological states and the abilities of music to alter them has resulted in comprehensive research investigating the psychological influences of music on peak performance. So, another study by Ballman and colleagues in 2019, which was referenced in this review, highlighted that or found that there was an increased motivation or will to train on the scale of an effect size of 1.52, okay? That's a massive effect size, okay? As you know, effect sizes, typically, whether you're looking at Cohen's D or Hedges G, as it's known, whether it's changed for small populations, you might use a measure known as Hedges G. Typically, you'll see it related as Cohen's and then the letter D, and it's called that after the Jacob Cohen, the person that coined these effect size ranges. 0.2, you're looking at a small effect size. 0.5, you're looking at a moderate effect size, and up to 0.8, you're looking at a large effect size. Large effect size would be something that's physically obvious. You could see it, okay? You could see a massive change in somebody. Be a little bit different. It'd be like, you not seeing a person. I think I've talked about this before. Be a little bit like you not seeing a person for a year or 2 years, and they'd done 3 IFBB shows, and the last time you saw them, they were like, 60 kilos, barely anything to them, and then they took a shit ton of steroids, went to the gym 7 times a day for 7 hours each session. Yeah, because that makes sense. Shit ton of trenbolone sandwiches and all the rest of it. And, the next time you see them, they're Ronnie Coleman. That's grossly over-exaggerated, but that's what a large effect size would be like. Someone you'd look at and you'd just be like, yeah, there's an obvious change here. So 1.5 is massive. 1.5 is absolutely massive. They saw a reduction in RPE, also on the effect size of 0.5. Okay, so moderate reductions in RPE, which is what we like to see. But anyway, using magnitude-based inferences, music either had no effect or a small detrimental effect on power and velocity, depending on the exercise. Again, keep type of music in mind. Repetitions to failure increased by a small to moderate amount for all music conditions, compared to no music at low but not high intensities. Self-selected music provided additional small benefits in repetitions than other music conditions. Okay, we'll show a quite stark increase in repetitions or repetitions to failure, as we'll see in a later study. Ratings of perceived exertion were similar between self-selected, metal, and no music conditions, whereas electronic dance music revealed higher responses. So it might be, again, that's where that bassy undertone is going to come into play a little bit. Bass is a key factor that was observed in one of the studies we're going to be looking at. Vigor increased after all music conditions but remained unchanged in no music. And that's from Moss, Enright, and Cushman, that was published in 2018. So we got one note here on dissociation, but we've got a quite large base to talk about dissociation later on, okay, as well. But I'm going to give you this quote now. So I'm looking at dissociation and distraction. It's basically what happens is when you take yourself away mentally from the situation that you're in, okay? You can think of daydreaming as a form of dissociation. When you're, the classic, male power fantasy, you might be, doing like a Bayesian curl, which is one of my favorite exercises. And, you might be envisioning that you're holding like the Spider-Man webs around the train and saving all of these people. And then you finish the set and everybody's there congratulating you and wanting to kiss your face. But all of a sudden then you come back to reality and you realize that nobody cares. Nobody cares. And if anything, they're probably looking at you as if you're a bit of a retard because you were probably pulling some weird facial expressions and looking in weird directions. So anyway, that's dissociation versus reality, right? But dissociation and distraction, you're distracting yourself from what's going on in terms of the physiological stress that your body is under. You do that psychologically. But here you have something from Jones Karagiorgis. I hope I'm... Karagiorgis, or Karagiorgis. I don't know how to pronounce that name. I'm very sorry. I'm just going to be skipping over that name if it... I'm just going to call him Kara. I'm sorry, whatever your name is. I'm just going to call you Kara, okay? Jones, Kara, and Ekakis from 2014. We examine the effects of music and parkland video footage on psychological measures during and after stationary cycling at 2 intensities. 10% of maximal capacity below ventilatory threshold and 5% above. 34 participants were exposed to 4 conditions at each intensity. Music only, video only, music and video, and control. So video without sound, basically, is the one condition. So you had only music, only the visual, then you have music and video, and then you have control. Analyses revealed main effects of condition and exercise intensity for effective valence, and perceived activation. State attention and exercise enjoyment. Okay, so state attention at the state of similar to state anxiety, where it's anxiety due to the stressful situation, attention due to the stressful situation. And exercise enjoyment. The music only and music and video conditions led to the highest valence and enjoyment scores during and after exercise, regardless of intensity. Findings indicate that attentional manipulations can exert salient influence on affect and enjoyment, even at intensities slightly above ventilatory threshold. Okay, so the attentional manipulation here is what they will be referring to by this dissociation and distraction. They can exert a salient influence on affect and enjoyment. They can increase the positive affect, the positive valence, and increase enjoyment. Okay, by potentially taking you to quite negative headspaces in a lot of ways. Depending on where your brain goes when you're under these very stressful situations. And even at intensity slightly above the ventilatory threshold, which is a high intensity threshold. So, when we're looking at increased vigor now and increased feelings of power, we'll get into what we mean by that as well. So, we have a study here from Biagini, and colleagues from 2012. This study demonstrated that increased performance during an explosive exercise and an altered mood state when listening to self-selected music. Therefore, listening to self-selected music might be beneficial for acute power performance. So there you go. Pardon me. Demonstrated increased performance during an explosive exercise and altered mood state with self-selected music. Therefore, self-selected music is probably going to be better than at least unselected music, and no music, obviously. Then you have increased feelings of power. So this is from a study from Hsu et al. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's HSU. It says, power-inducing music produced 3 known important downstream consequences of power: abstract thinking, illusory control, and moving first. Experiments 5A and 5B held all features of music constant except for the level of bass, and found that music with more bass increased participants' sense of power. Okay, so that's an important point. So I love this because this is something that's often demonized in modern society, especially men having these, like male power fantasies in their own head. They can have a lot of positive effects. And often I've always found, at least in mine, they tend to be quite self-sacrificing. They tend to be at least what most people would consider like noble and good. Like we have the classic meme, right, of, how most people think that they want to die, or how typically how girls and boys, right, how girls envision how they want to die, and it's like passing away peacefully in their sleep or something like that. And boys is like the Space Marine or Noble Six from Halo Reach, putting out a fucking fag or putting out a cigar, putting on their helmet, as they know they're not making it out of that situation, as their comrades or their townspeople flee the battlefield, and they're going to sacrifice themselves by giving their life and fighting the enemy till the last fucking breath, for them to be able to escape. Classic tales of what we would describe as nothing less than heroism. What our ancestors, what our predecessors did in World War II, the tales of heroism that came out of World War II. There was one guy, I think he was an American guy, I've forgotten his name, but it was after he lost one of his friends in the war, I heard about this from an old war story video that I watched a long time ago. He lost a friend in the war, and what happened was he ended up storming the house where he ended up getting captured and killed by the Germans, his friend did. And he killed everybody. There was like several Germans in there. He went in with his Thompson, killed everybody. But not only that, he was later on, I think, part of a tank unit. And the tank that he was in, or they were being overrun. The position was being overrun by Germans. And he noticed that one of the tanks was out of commission, but the gun on it was still in place and could still be fired. And to save his platoon, he jumped up on the tank, which was burning. It was on fire. And he, jumped behind the gunner's chair or whatever and was just gunning down everybody. He was literally just open in the open, completely exposed. Could have been shot at any point and died. But he's just there, like, mowing everybody down and saves, I think, at least a good part of his platoon, if not everybody. I can't remember his name. Oh, I can't remember his name. But, other, amazing stories like Carlos Hathcock is one of my favorite stories of his exploits during the Vietnam War, where over 3 days he crawled, I think it was 1,500 yards or so, completely undetected in his ghillie suit across open terrain to assassinate an NVA general, and literally spent 3 days out in the field without sleep, without any of these things, in his ghillie suit, peeing on himself, all the while, hearing, enemy combatants all around him, and he's just led there in his ghillie suit, slowly making his way closer and closer and closer. It takes him 3 days to get in position. And then after he makes the shot on the NVA general, he exfiltrates without anybody, being able to find him. And, it only takes him a couple hours on the way out because obviously they would be on heightened alert, but literally was so good. He was just hid there in his ghillie suit and then managed to crawl his way back out. Had over the course of 3 days that he crawled, on his side, on his front, in prone, slowly, methodically, the length of about 3 or more football fields, I think. I can't remember exactly how far he crawled, but it was in that region. It literally took him like 5 hours to move about 10 yards, I think, at one point. So imagine having that 5 hours of just constant focus to move as slow as 10 yards. He was confronted by a bamboo viper. Okay, he nearly got bitten by a snake. All of these things, he was scared, or he thought that he was going to be captured or smelt simply because of how many times he urinated on himself. Just these incredible tales, okay? And, sometimes we want to imagine that we can be people like that, these heroic people, okay? Sometimes we want to imagine we can be Master Chief and, all of these awesome figures, even awesome figures from history, okay? That have done truly incredible things. Truly incredible, noble, and heroic things, okay? Like the David and Goliath, the David and Goliath story, Imagine him being, David that takes down the giant, all of these things. Nothing wrong with these things. People want to call it like toxic masculinity if you imagine yourself as giving your life for your family, if the situation had ever come to it. And that's partly what men are for. We want to do good things. We want to do noble things, especially for the people that we care about and we love. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it actually confers positive benefits on your training as well. So don't be afraid to imagine in your mind that you're the hero. Okay? It's a good thing. Just make sure you're doing heroic things. Do good things. Do good things with your life. Yeah, so then we have increasing / mediator of arousal. So going back to that Ballman paper that I mentioned before, the 2021 one. These feelings may also mediate determination of whether an individual responds favorably or prefers a particular type of music. Optimal arousal levels have been implicated in peak exercise performance and follow an inverted U-shaped pattern, whereby too much or too little results in performance decrements. Music has been well described to mediate arousal during exercise. Indeed, inherent characteristics of music, such as high tempo and volume, have been implicated to mediate increases in arousal with concomitant increases in performance. So we have one study here by Bigliassi et al., I believe that's how you say it. The BOLD, as they call it, the blood oxygen level dependent. Now, the blood oxygen level dependent is a type of MRI that's able to assess the effects of increased neural activity due to changes in volume of oxygenated blood going to a specific brain region. Okay. Now that brain region, I didn't quote the exact brain region that it was in this study. It's like the front left gyrus, I believe it's called. But the blood oxygen level dependent response was compared between conditions to identify the combined effects of music and exercise on neural activity. The findings indicate that music reallocated attention towards task-unrelated thoughts. That's that dissociation and distraction again. And that was a moderate effect size, 0.52 for that. So there was a moderate effect of music on the reallocation of attention towards task-unrelated thought, and upregulated affective arousal, 0.72. So getting up towards a large effect size with regards to that one, to a greater degree compared to a no music condition. So music, massive effects, or at least moderate to high effects, moderate to large effects on the dissociation and distraction element, which is very important, as we'll see later, and upregulated affective arousal, which is also massively important, as we've already discussed. So lots of positives for music with regards to the effects it has on the brain, with the effects it has on neural activity and nervous system activity. Again, these are going to improve your mood. When you're more aroused, you're going to be in an improved mood state up to that certain point, up to that peak. You're going to have increased exercise enjoyment. And there's another quote here from that paper. It says, whether an individual prefers or does not prefer the music that they are listening to has been shown to potently influence mood states and RPE. Thus, the consideration of preference whilst listening to music during exercise may be especially important. Okay, if you're going to listen to music that you like. Okay, don't be dogmatic about the music. Listen to music that you like. And that's going to be different for everybody. When we're talking about tempo, I've got a lot of reference songs, which you can sort of understand the different tempos of what they're going to be talking about when we talk about studies that use specific tempo regions, which is coming up very shortly. I've got some common songs here which would be used in a gym playlist. A lot of them are from mine. But ultimately, it's going to be what you prefer. Some people prefer listening to movie soundtracks, and films and TV soundtracks. Nothing wrong with that. This does suggest a possible increase in cognitive processing speed and the organization of music whilst listening, organization of movement whilst listening to music during exercise also. And we observe that via the effect of synchronicity and musical beat rhythm on exercise efficiency. So when we're looking at the musical beat or the rhythm, every song will have a beat that you can trace out. Now, it might not be a standard 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's many different time signatures in music. Now, I played drums to quite a high degree with regards to high grade when I was in comprehensive school. Many different time signatures were employed in some of the pieces I had to play. 12/8, 6/8, 4/4, 3/4, 2/2. Okay. And ultimately, all this means just different ways the music is arranged. And that will affect things like the speed, it will affect things like the BPM, and it'll affect the way the music sounds. Okay. So the only way I can really describe it is when you're listening to, it's 4/4 or standard time, any rock song, AC/DC, Thunderstruck, Highway to Hell, the standard thing where you're hearing like boom dat, okay, that's how we often call it with drums as well. But 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, so what you would call it. It means it's 4 crotchet beats to every bar, and that's just called standard time. Okay, and you can do BPM very, very easily off of that. But some songs where you hear it just sounds slightly different. It might sound a little bit more swung, or it might sound like the bars and the phrases just differ slightly in their length. It might be because the time signature has changed to something like 3/4 or 6/8. A great example of this is, I believe it is Black Dog by Led Zeppelin. Where let me just see a minute. Let me just see a minute if it is that song. I'm just gonna play it on my. Let me have a look. I'm just gonna Google it a minute. I'm not actually gonna play it. I'm gonna Google it. Is it Black Dog? Because I know in one of the Led Zeppelin songs is actually really interesting, because the time signature between the drums and the guitar is actually different. Yes. Okay, there we go. So I think it is this one. So in Black Dog, they actually have bars of what we call 5/4, which is one extra beat in one of those bars, and that drastically influences where the beats are going to fall. And for instance, if a song is played in different time signatures, you'll hear them out of time, and it sounds really weird. That's why music has to sound in time, as we call it, in order for it to be perceived the way it is. When something is out of time, okay, you notice it instantly, okay, and it throws off the entire song, it throws off the entire listening experience. But what actually happens in here is that the guitar riff, or is a din-din-din, 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 the drummer is just playing 4/4, but the guitar is playing 3/4, which is one beat less every bar, as we would call it. So that means that the song is progressing quicker for the guitarist than it is for the drummer, but every 4 bars it actually relines up. That's actually a quirk of the song. But it sounds weird. When you listen to that phrase, you won't hear, and that's a big thing with a song, you'll notice that in just a typical beat, a standard 4/4 beat, the certain guitar string or certain guitar notes and certain drum beats and certain lyrical flourishes, whatever you want to use, will fall in the same time, and you can predict it, okay? So when you listen to a song enough times, you can actually predict what's going to fall when. When the time signatures don't match up, that doesn't work, okay? That doesn't work, because then the guitar in bar 2 is going to be starting on a different beat than when it started on bar 1. So when in bar 1, the bass drum, the hi-hat, or the crash cymbal from the drummer starts on beat 1 and the guitar starts on beat 1, it's actually going to start with something different in the second bar. It's actually going to start when they hit the snare and the hi-hat, and it just throws off your listening experience if you or it throws off your tracking of the song if you're not actually sure of what the time signature is, or if you're expecting those time signatures not to change. So that's an example of where I forgot exactly why I was talking about that, but the time and the synchronicity really, really matters. Because here it says mean VO2. This is from, again, Bacon, Myers, and Kara. I'm sorry, I'm getting that name wrong again, from 2012. Mean VO2 differed among conditions, being lower in the synchronous compared to the slow tempo asynchronous condition. There was no difference. Now, VO2 is maximum oxygen uptake. It's a measure of aerobic fitness. There was no difference in heart rate or RPE among conditions, although heart rate showed a similar trend to VO2, being lower in the synchronous versus the asynchronous. The present results indicate that exercise is more efficient when performed synchronously with music than when musical tempo is slightly slower than the rate of cyclical movement. I think that's referring to cycling. And that's basically that's why, for example, in indoor cycling classes, instructors will often try and time their pedal strokes, their RPM, with the BPM so that it lines up, okay? You'll often have this in resistance training as well, where sometimes you'll either intentionally, unintentionally, or unknowingly go to the beat of the music with your timings. So, Son by Rammstein is a great example of this in the chorus, which is very, very slow. Now, I love that song. I find it extremely motivational, which tends to go against the grain with it being so slow, but it's massively self-preferred by me. And I often find myself going unintentionally to the beat of the music, especially with the eccentric, where I'll lengthen the eccentric a little bit slower and then come up at a controlled tempo in the concentric, and I'll match up with, and it's quite easy with the chorus as well, where he's actually counting down at the start of every line. He goes 1 and then 2 and then 3, and obviously it's in German, so I don't know the exact German lyrics off the top of my head. But each line of the chorus, aside from I think it's the 4th in the first one and the 4th and 8th in the second and third, starts with a number. Okay, so it's easy to track, but lining it up tends to increase efficiency, which can be good if either you want to get closer to failure or get more reps before you get to failure. Now, it can potentially have the opposite effect if it's keeping the set going too long. If you're keeping the set going too long and you're generating too much fatigue, it might actually have the opposite effect. So do take this, might not always be wise. It depends on what type of training you're doing. If you're doing a long endurance cycling session, or you're doing a steady state run, for example, one of the big things that was noted in one of the other studies, which we're going to be looking at a bit later on, I think it might be in the next one, I'm not sure if it's the next one or a later study, is that, too high intensity music or too fast tempo music can actually decrease exercise efficiency, potentially in exercise modalities where you're doing long steady state work. So doing something which is sort of going to match your cadence is going to be important for increasing exercise efficiency in those. And that's often why, as I said, instructors will try and pick songs which they know the BPM to, and they'll match their RPM to that. Or they'll do their RPM in half time, so that if they've got a song which is 180 BPM, they'll do their RPM at 90 so that it's still synchronized at just half time. So we're now looking at effective music selection on plasma catecholamines, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. So adrenaline and noradrenaline. So the plasma norepinephrine concentration immediately before the end of listening to slow rhythm music was significantly lower than before listening. Okay, so norepinephrine concentration before the end of listening to slow rhythm music was significantly lower than before listening. The plasma epinephrine concentration immediately before the end of listening to fast rhythm music was significantly higher than before listening. Is he indicating that listening to fast rhythm music elevates norepinephrine, is the sort of assertion that's being made here. Elevates adrenaline. Always good to know. The effect of music, the type of music, had no effect on blood lactate and ammonia levels or on plasma catecholamine levels following exercise. In conclusion, listening to slow rhythm music decreases the plasma norepinephrine levels, which decreases the opposite of adrenaline. And listening to that seems weird. I might have quoted that wrong. I don't know. Bear with me on that one. Make sure you check out the reference for this. It's Yamamoto et al. From 2003. Check out the reference yourself for this. But listening to fast rhythm music increases the plasma epinephrine level. The type of music has no impact on power output during exercise. I'm just going to get another drink a moment, guys. Okay, I'm back. So, we're at about an hour now. We've still got a fair bit to go. But already we're getting a lot of good information coming out of this episode. So, another quote here, going back to Ballman from 2021. Relaxing music has been shown to lower norepinephrine levels, whilst fast tempo music has been shown to, I must have got it right before then, has been shown to increase epinephrine levels with exercise. Lower plasma catecholamine levels have been noted by other groups while listening to classical music during treadmill running. While not confirmed, it has been suggested that the decreases in catecholamines reflect lower sympathetic output, thus possibly influencing blood and oxygen delivery to peripheral skeletal muscle. Conversely, listening to arousing music during a warm-up has been shown to increase catecholamines, which may ultimately influence muscle activation and metabolic responses during subsequent exercise. So, when we're looking at the effect, as we've talked about before, on neuromuscular fatigue, we have one study here by Centala, however you say the name, from 2020, and they had a study where 10 healthy college-age men visited the laboratory on 2 occasions separated by 7 days, and they measured something known as the electromyographic fatigue threshold, okay? And they determined that from an incremental, increasing in increments, single leg knee extensor ergometer for each visit, okay? So knee extensor ergometer is basically measuring the force of the quads. As I said, determined here through a single incremental test and operationally defined as the highest exercise intensity that can be sustained indefinitely without an increase in EMG activity in the working muscle. Okay, so they're measuring the activity within the muscle, twitch rate, all of these different things. And basically they're taking this fatigue threshold as the highest intensity that the person can sustain indefinitely without increases or without any more increases in EMG activities in what would be the quadriceps. So in a randomized order, subjects either listened to music or no music for the 2 visits. So they had a music and a no music condition. All music was presented as instrumentals and randomized with a tempo ranging between 137 and 160 beats per minute. The results indicated that listening to fast tempo music during exercise increased maximal power. In here, they have a mean increase of about 6 watts, which is significant. And in terms of the electromyographic fatigue threshold, it increased it also by 7 watts. It increased that by 7 watts. However, there were no significant mean differences between the 2 conditions for absolute and relative end exercise heart rate, as well as end exercise rating of perceived exertion for the exercise leg. So what these results actually suggest is that listening to fast tempo music can increase overall exercise tolerance, as well as increase the neuromuscular fatigue threshold. Okay, so that's going to be very, very important for training. Also, So it's increasing the threshold at which you can sustain an activity without associated increases in EMG activity, and you can sustain that indefinitely. And it can also increase exercise tolerance, and obviously dissociation and distraction is going to go hand in hand with that. This is what I mentioned before. So music decreases CV efficiency during steady state exercise. I'm phrasing it that way because I want it to be phrased as a question. Okay. So from Birnbaum, Boone, and Huschel, or Huschel, I believe is how you would say that. 6 males and 5 females completed. Can you say that nowadays? I don't know if you can say that nowadays. The study's transphobic. I don't like it. Study's transphobic. Okay, now that everybody is offended, let's just carry on. 6 males and 5 females completed 15-minute steady-state exercise sessions jogging at 5.5 miles per hour at 0% grade whilst listening to fast music, that was treatment 1, slow music, that was treatment 2, and no music, which is control. God, remember the days when you could just say male and female, man and woman, and they actually meant something? An ANOVA with repeated measures was used to compare the 3 conditions. And a post hoc, and what's known as a post hoc chef test, is just another form of doing after you observe a significant difference and you want to observe exactly where that significant difference occurs, you do something called a post hoc analysis, just describing the type of test that was used, was performed to determine which groups differed. Oxygen consumption, that's VO2, cardiac output, stroke volume, minute ventilation, and frequency of breaths significantly increased listening to fast music compared to the slow music and no music conditions. Systemic vascular resistance significantly decreased while listening to fast music compared to slow music and no music. Okay. These findings suggest that listening to fast music during steady-state treadmill exercise produces cardiovascular and respiratory responses that are significantly different from how the body responds to the same exercise intensity when listening to slow or no music. The data indicate that listening to fast music decreased the subject's cardiovascular efficiency since the subjects were able to perform the same steady-state treadmill exercise with either slow music or no music with a lower stroke volume, cardiac output, and rate of oxygen uptake. That's where potentially, as I said before, in some instances where you're looking at more low to moderate steady state activity, if you're looking to improve aerobic capacity and exercise tolerance, then fast beaty music might not be ideal because they're promoting, or one might suggest they're promoting overstimulation and over arousal that's necessary for the activity that you're completing. Okay? So that's why you should take care if you're planning on going to the gym and just doing like a long cycling session, or maybe if you have waterproof headphones and you're doing a swim, for example, a long swim, then, fast beaty EDM or metal might not be best for you. Obviously, there is the preference element. It might not be best for you. Ultimately, what might be best for you is something like an audiobook or a podcast or something nice and slow and maybe just instrumental. Something like that might be better for not overstimulating you during that activity when you want to keep that level of stimulation in relative check. This may be better, therefore, with high intensity exercise. However, I believe this is from the same paper, or if not, it's from the paper. No, I believe it's from the paper by Ballman. The simultaneous decreases in vascular resistance may also indicate that increased cardiac output is paired with less impedance or less resistance to blood flow, which could be favorable during maximal exercise, as oxygen delivery can be a limiting factor to maximal performance. This is further bolstered by findings of increased VO2 max while listening to fast tempo music during maximal aerobic exercise. This plausible increase in blood flow may also partially explain findings of increased lactate clearance whilst listening to music. So therefore, again, depending on the type of session you're doing, you might be doing cardio, but you might be doing HIIT, you might be doing Tabata, you might be doing fartlek, you might be doing sprint intervals up a hill, okay? In which case you might want that fast-paced music, especially when you're in your in your work periods. I remember when one of the programs I used to teach, it was a Les Mills program, Les Mills Grit, it was known. And fair play to them, even if you don't like the type of training that it is, you don't like the type of cardio that it is or whatever. And, you can have your criticisms of it. The one thing Les Mills as an organization really do really well is music choreography. They do music extremely well. And I've always found that in Grit. The Tabata track from what's known as Release 18, Les Mills Grit Release 18, which came out a little while ago, is one of I believe it's a track they created and composed themselves. But literally it would just be, very fast, beaty when you were in your work periods of 20 seconds, and then in your rest period, it would just die off completely. You could tell that they were maybe trying to exploit this, in particular, this factor of music, whereby when you're working, you want this nice heavy beat behind you, increasing the arousal, increasing the enjoyment, increasing the power and vigor and vitality. And then when you're resting or when you're doing something that's lower intensity, you don't want it quite as intense, okay? So in body pump, more often than not, it's chart music and stuff like that. Whereas in Grit, it's very, very, fast, beaty EDM a lot of the time. I remember Chase and Status and Major Lazer being prominent features of the music choices. You also have effects on hormones then. So increased cortisol during and post-exercise with music versus without. Don't have a knee-jerk response to that. I know people like to demonize cortisol. Just give it a moment. So one study from Brownlee et al., I got another quote from them just underneath this, showed that listening to fast-tempo music during high-intensity exercise resulted in higher salivary concentrations of cortisol compared to no music. These findings have been reinforced by others, showing that motivational music results in sustained elevations of cortisol following exercise. When you understand, obviously the body is responding to a stress response, especially, even when it's listening to music and you've got that dissociation element, it's responding to a stress response. So you're going to get that increase in cortisol. But is it a bad thing? Is the question. From Brownlee, repeated measures ANOVA revealed increased respiratory frequency during fast music as compared to the no music and sedative music conditions. Plasma cortisol levels did not differ at baseline across the music conditions. However, following high-intensity exercise, higher cortisol levels were associated with fast music as compared to no music and sedative music. You had a music and intensity interaction that was significant. And that was from 1995. So I ask you, is this a bad thing? The reason why I want you to consider, is this a bad thing, is this. While the consequences of ordered cortisol response, let's try that again. While the consequences of altered cortisol responses on performance while listening to music are not fully clear, increased cortisol could improve substrate availability during exercise and recovery through increased gluconeogenesis and free fatty acid mobilization. Okay, the main glucocorticoid, which is a steroid hormone that helps regulate metabolism, inflammation, and the immune system, is cortisol, accounting for 90% of the total activity of these substances. It is secreted by the adrenal cortex of the adrenal glands and, among other functions, plays important roles during and after exercise, including taking part in gluconeogenesis and accelerating the mobilization and use of fats to produce energy. Cortisol has important metabolic functions such as influencing the metabolism of glucose, proteins, and lipids. It raises blood glucose and increases fatty acid mobilization from reserves to active tissues. So, you've got to ask yourself sometimes, is the increase in cortisol a bad thing? Ultimately, the body has cortisol for a reason. People love to demonize it. They say, you can't lose fat if you've got high cortisol and stuff like that. And ultimately, obviously, fat loss is going to come down to an energy deficit. But, the body has cortisol for a reason. So if it's chronically high, yes, it can lead to problems, but anything that's chronically high can lead to problems. So you have to take into account that everything is relative. Everything is relative in this sense that sometimes elevation in cortisol can be bad. Sometimes it can be good. Ultimately, the body has cortisol for a reason. If it didn't need it, it wouldn't have it. On the other hand, and this is where cortisol can be a potential negative, especially if it's high for so long, it can inhibit protein synthesis and decrease muscle mass by its catabolic action. So it is a catabolic hormone. Obviously, muscle catabolism is necessary to a certain extent. But obviously, if this is chronically high and you're getting a lot of catabolism and not a lot of anabolism, if you have goals like muscle growth, it's going to be a very bad thing. So again, relative depending on what the acute time frame is. In general, for this point, however, the effects of music on the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis appears to be dependent on whether music is considered sedative or stimulative. Sedative music has been shown to decrease cortisol levels following short-term high-intensity exercise. Thus, this supports the idea that different types of music may alter physiological responses to exercise differently, further highlighting the importance of understanding how music preference influences exercise responses. So there you go. I don't understand why my nose is so itchy. I swear to God, I'm not a drug addict. I'm not on the white marching powder, okay? I'm not, snorting creatine or anything like that. I don't know what it is. I'm a little bit warm at the moment. I'm a little tiny bit sweaty in this room. Okay, I might have forgotten to turn the heating down. Because it's just quite warm at the moment. But I'm not sure why my nose and my face and everything is so itchy. I don't get it. It's so annoying. Anyway, I want to flash this graph up for you. I want to flash this figure up for you. So this is a little figure which you can sort of, again, you can save it or screenshot it, whatever it is. It sort of highlights the interaction between the different categories that we've already talked about. So you have music and exercise, and I'll describe it for you guys who are listening as well. Obviously, if you're watching the video, you can see it. You've got music and exercise on the left-hand side, and you've got two arrows coming out up diagonally and down diagonally to the right from that box, okay? Now, on the top box, you have psychological. And as factors for the psychological, you have affect, you have mood, and you have subjective feeling. In the bottom box that the other arrow is pointing to, you have the physiological. So it influences oxygen uptake, cardiac output and blood flow, hormonal response, and lactate clearance. Now, both of these psychological and physiological factors point to a central red box, in which case you have the psychophysiological, in which case you have arousal, you have dissociation, and you have autonomic control. So ultimately what this diagram, and again, you can save it if you need to, is highlighting is that music and exercise has these effects on the psychological domains and the physiological domains. These then have the effect of combining together and influencing each other in these psychophysiological variables, as we would call them. Obviously, then they each have their own effects, positive or negative, on performance. And obviously, you have to count music and exercise together because exercise has effects on these things in and of itself. Now, we have effective music preference. So this is one of the other sections from that paper, in which case we're looking at effective music preference. So in this case, preferred music is defined as any song, genre, rhythm, etc., which individuals deem most favorable when presented with an array of music choices. So when you're presented with an array of different choices of songs, of genres, of rhythm, of artists potentially. I don't know if artist was included in this review, but when you're presented with a different genre or different song, different rhythm, different whatever, it's the one that you would prefer if all of those options were presented to you. Okay? Non-preferred is just what is deemed as least favorable. So let's go into more detail on dissociation, because one of the key things here, and I'll show this graph as well. So this is a graph here, or a figure, which relates music preference to performance via four main factors. Music preference has effects on performance, has effects on dissociation, has effects on acute recovery, and has effects on affective responses. So if you imagine music preference in a box on the left, in the middle, which you have four arrows pointing to, are motivation, you have dissociation, you have acute recovery, and you have affective responses. And then from each of those boxes, you have arrows converging on another box, which is performance. So music, preference, all of those arrows splinter off into those four that I just mentioned, and all of them come back down again, converge at the performance variable. So dissociation. So Ballman here brings up a study from 200 participants. And I believe this is a study by Connon and Scott. I'm just going to see if I can find it. I believe it is. I believe it's the study by Connon and Scott that they're referencing. In which case, they documented that enjoyment and interest in exercise were greater with preferred music compared to no and non-preferred music. These differences were only apparent in individuals who had the most attentional focus on the music during exercise. This would suggest that benefits of preferred music are contingent on the participant directing their attention to the music versus the task, okay? So that's that dissociation element, when you're focusing your attention on something that is actually not the task. Now, sometimes it's good to focus specifically on what you are doing if you are aiming to increase neuromuscular coordination and these kinds of things. But in terms of increasing things like RIR and RP and reps to failure, these kinds of things, and increasing training volume, the benefits of preferred music are contingent, meaning they rely on the participant being able to direct their attention to the music versus the task. If you can't do that, if you can't take your focus away from the task and put it towards the music, then you might not get the performance benefits from your preferred music. Expanding on that, a crossover design to address some of the limitations that were in this study, because I believe it was a between studies design. A crossover design was used, and although heart rate was not different between conditions, RPE was higher during the non-preferred music condition as to both no music and preferred music. So if you're listening to music you don't enjoy, you really don't prefer, your rate of perceived exertion is actually higher than if you don't listen to music at all, and certainly if you listen to music that you prefer. Furthermore, distance cycled was higher whilst listening to preferred versus non-preferred music. This is the key point here, this suggests that non-preferred music results in worsened dissociative ability even beyond that of no music at all, and that preferred music may be optimal for performance. Further studies have supported these findings, showing that preferred music increases the ability to dissociate and lowers RPE during endurance exercise. Now, that's obviously specific to endurance exercise, but it's an important point to consider that the preferred music increases your dissociative ability, which in some instances is not a positive, okay? In this instance, it absolutely is. If it's going to decrease RPE, odds are you're going to get more training volume because you're going to get more reps before you hit failure. So here you go. Here's from Connon and Scott. So referencing the study of 200 participants now. Results indicated all types of music induce greater performance than the control group, with dance music being significantly greater than the control group. Preference of music was not found to significantly influence performance. RPE per calorie was implemented to analyze the psychological aspect. Results indicate the control no music group underwent the least amount of dissociation and the dance group underwent the most. Preference was found to significantly affect RPE, and a significant negative correlation was also reported. It concluded that the type of music and preference should be considered for professionals designing programs for clients, because this fed into something known as the bottleneck hypothesis, okay? So the bottleneck hypothesis, highlighted by Ballman, is a speculation that improvements may have been manifest in what they call the bottleneck hypothesis of sensory input, whereby only a finite amount of sensory information reaches the central nervous system at one point in time. In theory, this may cause the high amounts of favorable stimuli from the preferred genre to attenuate the perception from signals of effort and discomfort. This could explain the increased dissociation and repetition volume while listening to preferred versus non-preferred genre music. So what they're basically hypothesizing here is that due to all of the different stimuli that are coming from the fact that you're training, on top of the favorable stimuli from the preferred music that you're listening to, basically the body can only react and interpret and really focus on so much stimuli. As such, when you get, think of it as like a blockage in an artery, basically. Your body, when it has a blockage in an artery, can only let so much through, okay? But in this is not like a blockage in an artery. It's just from the fact that the opening is not wide enough that only certain stimuli can make it through. That's why we call it a bottleneck. Because imagine a bottleneck is getting a lot thinner. Obviously, less liquid can make it through at a given time, okay? And at that time, only a certain amount of stimuli can get through. And as such, due to the high amounts of favorable stimuli, you might get more of them coming through due to them being in high amount, due to them being favorable. And as a result, it's going to increase your dissociative capacity, because those stimuli coming through and getting to the central nervous system is going to distract you from what you're doing, because the body's focusing on those, the mind is focusing on those. And as a result, it may attenuate the perception of signals from effort and discomfort. Again, that's where you might get those decreases in RPE from. So from Breeden, Dixon, and Warburton in 2013, again, I don't know why my nose is so... I really look like a crack addict. Scratching my nose so much. I look like such a fucking crack addict. My nose is going red. I can see it. I'm just going to double check. My nose is starting to go red on the outside. This is ridiculous. Why am I so itchy? I had a shower today. I'm not stinky. I'm not dirty. I'm not disgusting. I swear. Irrespective of sex, adopting an external focus resulted in significantly better performance on all tests when compared with no focus or internal focus conditions. An internal focus also resulted in performance decrements for grip strength, push-ups, and vertical jump versus no focus, which is an interesting observation indeed. These results demonstrate that instructing individuals to adopt an external focus provides a performance advantage on appraisals of aerobic and musculoskeletal fitness, whereas an internal focus may hinder performance. So you think of it on a treadmill. An easy example here is when you're on a treadmill and your performance is going to be hindered if you're constantly focusing on the time, or if you're constantly focusing on your stride or your stride rate, or all of these things. You're probably going to have a worse time. It's going to feel like time is dragging a lot. Whereas if you manage to dissociate and focus on something else, whether it's music, whether it's a YouTube video you're watching, whether it's why do you think people pair watching Netflix or training, whatever it may be, with YouTube videos and stuff, or shows, movies? You know, especially ones where you just sat in for a long period of time. Remember when I was doing a little bit more cycling exercise than I did before? I'd like to take my tablet that I had at the time into the studio and watch. I believe I was watching Witcher on Netflix while I was training. Helps with the dissociative capacity. You forget that you're pedaling. You forget about the signals of discomfort and stuff like that. Whereas if you're constantly focusing on what you're doing, more often than not, it's up to a certain point. Obviously, up to a certain point, mainly applicable to lower intensity endurance exercise. But can certainly help. Maybe something worth considering. And it's good because you can catch up on your favorite shows and movies and stuff like that. Improvements, let's go back to the Ballman study again, may be due to differing mechanisms that other investigations employing music interventions during exercise. For example, and we've talked about this ad nauseum now, a widely ergogenic mechanism of preferred music during resistance exercise, or during exercise in general, is improved dissociation resulting in lower RPE. However, preferred music conditions played solely during a warm-up have shown no changes in RPE. Music shifts attention as an external factor, which can distract from the discomfort and fatigue. So there you go. That's how important dissociation is. Now, I'm gonna pause it here. I'm not gonna pause the recording or anything. I'm just gonna be a couple of seconds. I need to go do something about this. This is doing my head in, quite literally. So I'm only going over there, guys. I will return. Okay, I'm back. I may have edited that out. I don't know. I'll probably have to wait for my webcam to refocus again, but it seems to be doing okay. So, I've taken my shirt off. Not my shirt off, my overshirt at the moment. Simply because I'm wondering if it's because I was getting warm that it was, causing my skin to go all clammy, and that was causing it to go itchy and all stuff like that. So we'll see. See if now I've taken my overshirt off, which I didn't want to do. I like that overshirt. It's really nice. But we'll see if that helps improve anything. But we're getting on to resistance training in particular now. Obviously, that was one of the big parts of my query. But obviously, it's good to look at the overall evidence base as well, because then you can get evidence that's going to allow you to make inferences and all stuff like that. But this is just a great example of preferred versus non-preferred music, or preferred versus no music. So we have two conditions here, and these are presented as box and whisker plots. Now, box and whisker plot is a way of plotting the data, and it gives you the central measurement in the form of a median average, and also the quartile ranges between the first quartile and the third quartile, okay, which is 50% of the data pretty much between 25, the cutoff for 25 data points, or 25% of the data points are below this line, and 25% of the data points are above the box. So it gives you that massive range from 25% to 75%, which is obviously where the central tendency is going to be located typically. And it gives you the mean average via a black line which goes across the middle of the box. And the median average is the 50th percentile. It's the exact middle of the sample. And then you get these, so that's the box, and then you get these whiskers that extend either side, and they are typically 1.5 times the interquartile range is what you'll typically see. But they're a way of visually presenting the data in a way that's often quite easy to see where the majority of the data points fall, where the median average is, And obviously then you can have different box and whiskers for different data sets, depending on, like, you could have classes that do well on a certain test or classes that are ranked on a certain test in school. Many different ways that you can present it. But this is presented as bicep curl with and without music, and also leg extension with and without music. And number of repetitions to what they call 80%, 10 rep max. But what they did find, which is interesting, and again, I'll flash the graph up, which is the only way you can really see it other than me just describing the results to you from the study, is just to look at the graph. But they said here, participants completed repetitions to failure for each of the exercises whilst listening to preferred or non-preferred music. So they were using 80% of their 10 rep max weight to failure. I believe that's what they're trying, that's what the y-axis is saying. 80% of their 10 rep max weight. On average, participants listening to preferred music increased total repetitions by 4 reps, or by 22%, showing remarkable increases in strength endurance. So for both conditions, it's very easy to see. For both conditions without music, they had 14 reps before they hit failure. In the preferred music condition, they had 18 reps before they hit failure. Now, the bars, especially on the leg extension without music, are quite wide. Okay, so take that into account, as I was showing that there is quite a lot of data that falls outside, or the data outside of the box between the 25 and 75% is quite wide. Okay, so take that into account. As you can even see here, the bottom whisker on the leg extension without music box extends down to the same level of the bottom whisker, with music, extends down to the same level as the bottom without music. And that doesn't happen with the bicep curl condition. So it's quite interesting to see, indicating there's a large amount of result variability, particularly in the leg extension condition. But the mean was still the same. 4 extra reps that they could get out. That's massive. If you're looking at something like muscle hypertrophy, that's any little bit of volume that you can get. And odds are then with the music, you've got to question whether without music, did they actually go to failure? Maybe the music is, again, having that positive effect of increasing motivation. They want to get further, closer to failure. So they said here's another study here, but I believe this might be the same study. Taking into account the whole group, men and women together, the barbell curl without music had on average 14 plus 2 repetitions, whereas the music average of number of repetitions was 18 plus 2. Whereas in the leg extensor, it was obtained as 14 plus 3, and without music, 18 plus 3. So that's what the results were from that study, where they showed a marked increase in the repetitions before failure with music versus without music. Now, we can only imagine that with non-preferred music, that would, in theory, be even worse. Okay. Then we have relative mean and peak power and velocity. That's what I meant to say. So this is from 2021 again, from a different paper by Ballman and colleagues, but it was released in the same year. During the first 3 repetitions, mean velocity, so you had an effect size of 1.6, massive effect size. Relative mean power, effect size was 0.55, so a moderate effect size, and peak velocity, 0.99, another large effect size, and peak power, 0.35, so a little bit lower on that end, were higher listening to preferred music versus non-preferred music. Finally, motivation during the lift, effect size of 5.9. Effect size of 5.9 for motivation being higher for preferred versus non-preferred music. Okay, so non-preferred music really can have a massive detrimental effect, potentially. Okay, so that you might even be better training without music in a silent home gym versus, some of the crap that they make us listen to. Glad I always take my headphones to the gym, but even then, the gym that I go to likes to play the music, often, in my opinion, excessively loud. Current findings suggest that listening to preferred music by the individual results in greater performance than non-preferred during resistance exercise. Athletes may benefit from the option to listen to their preferred music to increase motivation and resistance exercise performance. There is a major limitation of this review, however, and that is that almost all of the participants selected the same genre for their preferred music genre. 92% chose rap or hip hop, for example, which is obviously a very common one. And in the non-preferred condition, 83% of the participants chose country music. So that left it unknown in this study, at least, if it was the genre itself that resulted in increased performance. However, further studies have been done since then, have tried to address it, and they did find that individually selected preferred music genre also confers the positive effects seen before. So this is from Silver and colleagues. This study evaluated the influence of listening to varied conditions of musical genre preference on maximal strength and strength endurance testing on ratings of perceived exertion. We submitted 20 young men to 3 different listening conditions during strength testing: preferred music genre, non-preferred music genre, and no music. So those were the 3 conditions: preferred, non-preferred in terms of genre, and no music. With the order of these conditions, evidently me taking that overshirt off did not work. The order of these conditions randomized. We measured maximal strength with a hand grip dynamometer, strength endurance through the participants' maximal repetition in the lat pull-down exercise, and RPE by participants' completed Borg scales at the end of the strength test. Now, Borg can either be 6 to 20 or 1 to 10. Using 3-way analyses of variance, or ANOVAs, and a significance level of less than 5%, or P less than 0.05, we found that participants produced higher maximal strength, performed more repetitions of the lat pull-down exercise, and reported decreased RPE in the preferred music genre condition compared to the non-preferred music genre in maximal strength, strength endurance, and the no music conditions in maximal strength and strength endurance. Individually determined preferred music genres appear to improve maximal strength and strength endurance performance during exercise and decrease RPE in the preferred music genre condition. So there we go. So it's not just the genre, in fact, does have a positive effect. So even if it's just from the preferred music genre, okay, not necessarily like a particular artist or particular tempo, then it's going to have the positive effects from just the preferred music selection. So I know we're looking at speed tempo. So we're looking at speed, tempo, and volume of music. This is again from Kara et al., and I'm not going to try and pronounce the name again. So they used, for example, in their study, 4 different tempo ranges for music that they were investigating. And they branded them as slow, which is 95 to 100 beats per minute. If you want a reference, by the way, for 95 to 100 beats per minute, think of songs like Sweet Home Alabama by Lynyrd Skynyrd, that's 100 beats per minute. One by Metallica, it's about 99. Revelation by John Rich is about 99. Supersonic by Oasis, 102. Californication by Red Hot Chili Peppers, 96. Those kinds of songs, okay? They were deemed as slow. Then you have medium, which they deemed as 115 to 120 beats per minute. Some common songs people often listen to that fall into this sort of beats PM range or beats per minute range. Time Is Running Out by Muse. Sweet Child of Mine, Guns N' Roses, 125 is a little bit higher. Land of Confusion by Disturbed or Genesis in the range of 115 to 118. Billie Jean by Michael Jackson, 117. Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana, 117 beats per minute. By the way, for these, in order to determine these beats per minute, I'm going by the drum notation. So the drum notation, the service that I used to find the sheet music for these songs, which I've had a look at, is known as Songster. So it's SONGSTERR.com. And you can pull up sheet music, you can pull up tabs, all of these things for different songs. And it gives you the speed signature on there. Gives you the beats PM on there. Beats per minute. Then you have fast, 135 to 140. So songs you may know that would fall into this beats per minute. You have Minority by Green Day, it's 138. Feel Good Inc. by Gorillaz, it's 138. Summer of 69 by Bryan Adams is 139. Thunderstruck by AC/DC is a little bit slower, it's 134 thereabouts. And you also have YYZ by Rush. You might not know that one. It's more of one that I like more than anything. It's not necessarily very common that people know Rush songs, but that actually has a range. In the main beat that you get into when you're in the the opening solo on the ride cymbal, you're looking at about 141 beats per minute. It starts off at about 107. So when you're listening to the main sequences in YYZ, which is a really good song, it's a really good drum piece. It's really, really good if you like listening to drum pieces in songs. Very, very good. Very, very good drummer. Neil Peart, legend of the game. But that would be deemed as fast. And yeah, they are quite fast. But then you also have very fast, which is 155 to 160 beats per minute. Now, very fast at this kind of time, depending on the time signature, depending on the type of song that it is, depending on whether you're using crotchets or quavers or semi-quavers, is relative. There's a lot, songs are a lot faster, I'll just say that. And we'll get into some of those. But for example, songs that would fall into this range would be like Grease Lightning from Grease, 160 beats per minute. The Trooper by Iron Maiden, 162. MK Ultra by Muse, 155. Don't Stop Me Now by Queen, 158. Pin the Grenade by Blink-182, 158. Those kinds of songs. However, as we get to in a moment, I'll go through those at the end though. 28 undergraduate students cycled at exercise intensities presenting 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, and 90% of their maximal HR reserve. I believe that was what you would recommend or what you would be estimating by doing 220 minus your age. While their music preference was assessed using a 10-point scale. The exercise intensity times music tempo interaction was significant, as was the test for both cubic and quartic trajectories in the HR preferred music tempo relationship. What this basically means is that slow tempo music was not preferred at any exercise intensity, and preference for fast tempo music increased relative to medium and very fast tempo music as exercise intensity increases. Basically highlighting there's a particular sort of speed that as exercise intensity gets to a certain point, increases more and more and more, that we tend to prefer and we tend to gravitate towards instead of other different types, other different speeds. And obviously there's music that comes in various different speeds. So you have a lot of songs that are very much faster than 160 beats per minute. So that would be a limitation to the study. What about if a song was 200 beats per minute or 80 or 180 beats per minute? Okay, would this trend continue? Would you actually see a preference for more very, very fast music? You know, some of the iconic songs that people will often listen to in the gym are a lot faster than 160 beats per minute. Master of Puppets by Metallica, for example, is 211 beats per minute. It's very fast. Run to the Hills by Iron Maiden, another good one, 173 beats per minute. Wait and Bleed by Slipknot, for example, includes many different tempo ranges, all the way from 162 to 186. American Idiot is about 186 or 180 thereabouts. You know, Indestructible by Disturbed is 180 beats per minute. And the fastest one I've managed to find so far, Hot for Teacher by Van Halen, which is that iconic drum intro which sounds like a motorbike fucking backfiring, has 258 beats per minute, at least according to Songster, anyway. So, with regards to those, what would happen if we were playing like a Hot for Teacher or something, which is, you know, an amazing song. I love it. So, you know, what would happen if we were listening to very fast music, or very, very, very fast music in the 200 plus beats PM range? So, you know, there's more that we might address, and ultimately I think his preference is going to lead the way on that one. You know, because some people, for example, would like a song that is very, very slow, but maybe again triggers that emotional response, which increases arousal, and that's why you prefer it, such as Lose Yourself by Eminem, which is a really, really common one, which is only 65 beats per minute. It's only 65 beats per minute. It's nearly just 1 beat per second. So, you know, it's a very, very slow song. Slowest out of any of the ones we've seen. But, you know, people often love training to that song. I love training jiu-jitsu, which sadly I haven't trained for many, many months now. And whenever that song would come on, it would just, you know, give the role that, you know, new intensity kind of thing, or at least be like one of the things which might often cause you to relax and step back and focus a little bit on what you want to do. So depending on the type of training will depend on the type of music that you want in that training session. So from Hutchinson and Sherman, I mentioned this study earlier. Recreational exercisers preferred louder music than athletes and made more volume adjustments at points beyond the ventilatory threshold. No gender differences were observed for music intensity. Music was perceived as increasingly useful up to the point of ventilatory threshold, after which ratings plateaued and then declined during the cooldown. However, a gender times task intensity interaction revealed that whereas males followed a clear quadratic trend, females rated music as increasingly useful up to the point of GXT, indicating a significant difference in the way that men and women perceive music, especially when they are in training or when they're listening to music and when they're in training at different intensities. So, that's pretty much it. I'm thinking what that may tell us as well, where it says recreational exercises preferred louder music than athletes and made more volume adjustments, is that recreational trainers may focus more on the music, whereas athletes and who've been training for long periods of time and may be more goal-orientated and more performance-orientated anyway, simply will focus less on the music simply because they naturally have more focus towards whatever task that they are doing at that moment in time. And as a result, they may just see music as more of an accompaniment rather than what we would call a locus or a focus point. So I'm not sure whether the dissociative capacity would probably be good for athletes as well and would likely confer greater benefits, I would imagine. But it could potentially be recreational trainers lacking the mental fortitude that the increased mental fortitude, that athletes will have, an increased drive from repeated athletic training and pursuing a competition which their livelihood may rely on, may focus on it more as a motivational tool rather than an accompaniment. So, I don't know, could be more research that comes out in future to look at it in athletic populations. But getting into the final remarks now, guys. So, told you it was going to be a long episode, but I hope it's worth it. I hope it's worth it. The physiological basis for how preferred, and all of this just from their recommendations and concluding remarks section in the Baldwin paper. The physiological basis for how preferred music influences responses to exercise are poorly described, and understanding these will be paramount in increasing our understanding of how to use music preference to optimize performance. Okay, so just take into account, guys, everything that we've said today. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. There's still a massive amount of work that needs to be done. Music provides a very practical means for which to improve acute exercise performance. Music is easily attainable, cost-effective, and potent as an ergogenic intervention. It is important to the current review to note that music can be easily personalized and individualized. This allows for athletes and coaches to fine-tune music interventions on situational or characteristic bases. Recent data have now shown that preferred music still retains ergogenic potential, even if the music stimulus is only applied prior to exercise or during the warm-up. So good thing is, guys, if you go into the gym, it's a good idea to listen to the music that really arouses you on the way there. Especially when you're on the way there and then you warm up. So by the time you're into your main set, you are good to go. You're at that optimal peak. You're at the optimal peak of that arousal curve. Ultimately, the current evidence review suggests that an important aspect to increasing performance with music is personal choice. In many gyms, locker rooms, and competition settings, music is played over a community speaker. Current available data suggests that if the music played over the speakers is not preferred by the individual giving effort, performance may suffer. While mechanisms for improvements with preferred music are not fully understood, changes in motivation and effort likely play a pivotal role in music benefits during exercise. So ultimately, guys, if you go to the gym and the gym often plays music that you absolutely hate, which is typically the case for me, make sure you remember your headphones. And make sure you get a good set of headphones. Okay, like me, my ones are these ones that they fit in your ear. They're not the best in terms of sound cancelling. So maybe a good set of sound cancelling headphones that maybe you can ask your parents or your significant other for your birthday or for Christmas or whatever will be invaluable to your training. Coaches, and also one last note on that is the deprivation element. So deprivation is going to aid in dissociation as well, because if there's another element that takes you away from where you are now, it's going to aid in your ability to dissociate and distract yourself from the work that's going on. So that's why if you've got that sound cancelling, you don't even know you're in a gym, Okay, for all you know, you're doing a set of bicep curls, or you're doing a squat, you're doing a deadlift, and you're lifting a bar off your kids or something like that. Okay, you're going to get much greater performance outcomes with that. You're going to be much more stimulated because it's going to have that emotional aspect. It means a lot more to you. Picking up a bar and putting it down is going to mean nothing to you. Whereas if you were in a situation where, God damn it, you needed to, and you needed to lift a fucking car off your kids, it's going to be a lot different of a physiological response. And you could sort of harness that a little bit with the increased sensory deprivation. That's going to remind you, you're not in a gym. You're in the middle of a very dire situation. Again, in your mind. Coaches, athletes, and practitioners should attempt to ensure personalized music preference is achieved during activities involving high amounts of effort, which ultimately may result in superior performance. And that is where we're going to leave it today. So if you're a coach, if you're an athlete, if you're a gym goer, personalized music preference, achieve it for when you're in the gym. Somehow, if you have a home gym and you have a speaker system in that regard, perfect. Okay. Odds are, if you're in a situation where you have a choice between music you hate and no music, you should probably go with no music. Okay. So there you go. That's ultimately where we are, guys. Try not to train with music that you hate. If you are forced into it, obviously just do your best. And ultimately, no training is going to be better than no training for the most part. But music does seem to be an amazing tool for improving your performance, for training close to failure, for increasing your training volume, for reducing your RPE. So why not take advantage of it? Leave your favorite songs in the comments that you like to listen to when you're in the gym. And that is it from me today, guys. So I've taken up 2 hours of your time. Thank you very, very much, as always. Thank you. Thank you. And as always, guys, have an amazing morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever you are. And I'll catch up with you very soon. Godspeed.